Oh, and what is up next? Oh, the Intel Core i5-12400. This CPU is probably the biggest surprise I've seen so far in this tier list. It is selling right now for $110. That is actually really, really good. If you look at the performance of this versus the Ryzen 5 5600, which we'll soon be comparing it to, it's able to keep up with it. And I think at this price range, being about $10 to $15 less expensive than that CPU, I think might just put it just over the edge. And although I just had that ramble about how cores aren't everything for gaming, this is running on nearly the same architecture as the i3-13100 I just covered, but it comes with 2 more cores and 4 threads. So in that case, it is a faster gaming CPU because it is more up to date. Well, it's 1 generation behind, but not by much. It is a very excellent budget gaming CPU. I'm throwing it all the way up in A tier. For $110, you really can't beat this, and it's a great entry-level budget gaming CPU if you want to build a budget Intel PC around this. And the upgrade options from a 12100 or a 12400 or a 13100, like I just said, are also really good, which can be said for some of the later Intel CPUs I'll be covering in this video, because Intel's current LGA 1700 socket will be coming to an end. It's soon going to be replaced by the LGA 1851 socket that is going to be supporting Intel 15th generation CPUs and beyond. So just keep in mind, if you're gonna use one of these Intel CPUs, they aren't really gonna have any upgrade path beyond this year. The most you can upgrade to is a 14th gen CPU, which in a way is a little bit misleading because the architecture of 14th generation Intel CPUs are nearly the same as a 13th generation Intel CPU. That is kind of how bad Intel fumbled 14th gen. If you're wondering why many of the reviews for those chips are pretty bad. What is surprising though is another APU on this list, and that is the Ryzen 5 5500 GT. So this is a really interesting one because it's almost the same as a Ryzen 5 5600G, if you guys know what that is. And more or less, this is really close to a 5600G, but it's about $25 less. I believe the boost clock speed of the 5500 GT is about 0.2 or 0.4 gigahertz slower, which is not that bad because you can just overclock this CPU to make up for it. But for a price of $115, it's a bargain value APU, but I still don't really like it because it is so old with those integrated Vega graphics from such a long time ago that I still can't really rate it that well, but at least it goes above the 4600G. But the 14100F. So this CPU, like I just said, the difference between Intel 14th gen and 13th gen is really minimal. All it is pretty much just a clock speed increase. But there is a noticeable price increase with that, and most of the 14th generation CPUs you'll see me cover in this video aren't worth their increased markups in price over 13th gen. And that does extend to the 14100 because it currently retails for about $110-ish. And if we just saw previously in this tier list, the 12400 is the same price. It does outperform it, but it's not horrifically overpriced, so it's gonna go, I think, at the very bottom of D tier. It's not terrible, but it's certainly not great for its price. Because for literally a few dollars more, you can get the Ryzen 5 5600. This is an excellent 6-core 12-threaded CPU that is on AM4. It is basically the exact same as a Ryzen 5 5600X. It just doesn't have the X, but it is a substantial amount cheaper. This, like I said, $116, really good. It goes toe-to-toe with the 12400F that I just discussed earlier, and it's just a really great budget gaming CPU. It's on the Ryzen 5000 architecture, 6 cores, 12 threads, plenty of L3 cache, way more than the 5500, which is why there's a significant performance difference between the 5600 and the 5500. So it's certainly worth its price. And if you were debating of maybe getting the 5500, don't, because the 5600 exists for like 20 bucks more, 30 bucks more. So I'm gonna put it in A tier along with the 12400. But now the 5600 GT. This is literally a 5600G, just clocked slightly higher, but it does cost about like 15 bucks less. It's because for some reason the 5600G has been going up in price, maybe because they're making way for the 5600 GT, and apparently these old APUs, according to AMD, are still selling. I don't think you should get them though. Like I said, the 5600 is way faster. So let me go ahead and put this in the APU tier. I'm actually gonna put it below the 5500 GT because it's the exact same APU, just clocked slightly higher, which you can make up for with your own overclock. And once again, like if you're wondering, why is the 5600 rated so well for a gaming CPU, but the 5600 GT is not? Well, that's because if you actually look into the specifications of both of those CPUs, although they're both 6-core 12-threaded CPUs, there's a massive difference in L3 cache. So that's probably another thing you're gonna hear a lot in this video. L3 cache does play a role in how fast your CPU is for gaming, and the more you have, the better in a variety of games. And the 5600 comes with double the L3 cache of a 5600 GT, and that is noticeable in certain games. So with that line of thinking, the 5600G is gonna go below the 5600 GT because it costs more, it's the exact same APU. Now on that note as well, the 5600X is a very popular CPU, but I don't like it because if you look at benchmarks between the 5600X and the 5600, they perform basically the same. They literally do. And you're just paying a $30 markup in price for the X on the 5600. And that $30 you save going with the 5600 over the 5600X can be used for a better SSD, a better case, a better power supply, a lot of things. So it's still a strong performing budget CPU, just not as strong because it is a bit overpriced. So I gotta put this at the bottom of D tier. Oh, but this one. Okay, all right, I think I gotta give the 12600K more credit. This CPU very much is probably Intel's best value performing CPU right now. And I'll be honest with you, you don't need any more than this CPU. If you wanted an Intel CPU that is very well performing without overspending, do not look further than the 12600K. It straight up outperforms a lot of the other Intel CPUs we'll be covering later in this tier list video that may be newer, just because this comes with so many, not so many, but it comes with plentiful amounts of L3 cache, more E cores, and just a lot of meat for the price. For $150, it is truly outstanding, and it can handle up to at least like a 4080 or 4080 Super or a 7900 XTX without any chance of bottlenecking. The 12600K or just about any of the i5K series CPUs are gonna rank really well on this list because they are Intel's best CPUs for gaming, like I said at the very start of this video. So I'm gonna give this the credit it deserves. It's going at the very top of S tier. This is an amazing CPU from Intel for the price. Oh, but let's keep the applause going because now we come to my favorite CPU out of this entire video. This right here is the Ryzen 5 7500F. This is an AliExpress only CPU because at least here in the United States, US vendors are probably too scared to carry this CPU because their profit margins they would have to make with this CPU would be really low because on AliExpress, you can find these for as low as $150, which is nuts. That's a really good price for getting into the AM5 socket with excellent performance. And I'll say it, in terms of performance, this does slightly beat the 12600K that I just really glazed over. But the reason why it probably doesn't absolutely smash it is just because you can only get it from AliExpress. And apparently there's some of you who, how can I be polite about this? You're just not brave enough to order from AliExpress, even though I linked the correct affiliate link you'd want to use to order one of these from a credible seller, and it'll most likely show up to your door in working order. And as a matter of fact, I've bought 4 of these so far from AliExpress, and all of them have worked, you know, because they're AMD AM5 CPUs. They're authentic, they're not fakes. Because this is a real SKU that is being produced by AMD, it just happens to not be sold in the US. You know what was also not sold in the US until they brought it over and now everyone loves it? The 7900 GRE. And look how well received this has been in the GPU market. Get in on this CPU. The performance of it is unmatched for under $200. It beats the 12600K, which is why I'm gonna put it just above it here at the very top of S tier. And don't worry, we'll be returning to S tier eventually later in this video. Anyways, a CPU that doesn't make any sense, but I somehow bought one. The Ryzen 5 8500G. This is one of the new APUs from AMD, and fortunately, we have new integrated RDNA graphics with these APUs. So they are way better for gaming than the old 5000 series APUs, significantly better. And the cool thing with this CPU is that it, I think, retails for about $160 or $170, which for a 6-core 12-threaded CPU, that's not terrible, but kind of like Ryzen 4000, which I was saying earlier was kind of like the awkward middle child between 5000 and 3000. 8000 is unfortunately going to fall to the same fate. This architecture is a bit weird because this 6-core 12-threaded CPU comes with half the L3 cache of the older 7000 series 6-core 12-threaded CPUs we're going to cover real soon. So that does impact its gaming performance with a discrete graphics card. And also its integrated RDNA graphics are pretty mediocre as well. They get a lot better with an 8600G or an 8700G, but it's still a way better APU than those older ones, so it is going to go to the top of the APU tier list. AMD has been making a lot of hits when it comes to CPU, but this is definitely one of their fumbles. The 8400F, like I just said, is a part of that awkward middle child Ryzen 8000 architecture that comes with half the L3 cache of Ryzen 7000, so its gaming performance is actually worse despite being a larger number starting with 8 versus 7. And the price of this, I think, is $170, and I'm just gonna be frank with you, the 7500F destroys this. It absolutely does. Why consider this? In fact, I think it might even be slower than like a 5600X. Actually, yeah, according to Ancient Gameplays, I think he benchmarked the 8400F versus the 5600X, and it lost. That's bad. That's not good. But it is cheap enough to not be horrendous. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and put this in F tier for the moment because it is legitimately a step down in performance versus its older generation Ryzen 7000 CPUs. So pretty embarrassing. What's also kind of embarrassing is the 5700G. It doesn't make sense anymore because, you know, you can get an 8600G for like 30 bucks more, and that's a way better APU. So this is gonna go above the 4600G. Don't get an APU if you're gonna get a graphics card with it. Oh, but this is another big fumble, even more than the 8400F. Have you guys seen the 5700? It's a really big fumble by AMD. The 5700X is a fantastic CPU. I'll already go ahead and spoil that, and as a matter of fact, I'll put it in the tier that it belongs to be in, C tier, above the 12100. But the 5700 has the exact same sort of fallbacks as the 5500. It comes with half the L3 cache of the 5700X despite being an 8-core 16-threaded CPU, and it retails for $170. And this CPU is slower than a 5600X, which I don't rate too highly. For gaming, this is not a good CPU. It's gonna be our first Garbo tier of the video simply for the fact that for gaming, it is actually trash. There are significantly better CPUs than it in its same price range, and it's beaten out by CPUs that have lower core counts than it. So yeah, 5700, stay away from it. But I won't be the same sort of mad as when it comes to the 13400F. This CPU, it's not bad, but it's not great. But what I will say is that it did get a very nice discount. It now retails for about $170, which is where it belongs. The only problem with that is that you can get, you know, one of the new Ryzen 7000 5 series CPUs. I guess it won't be new for long because Ryzen 9000 is coming out soon. But you can get one of these for about $20 to $30 more, and it definitely puts some daylight between this CPU and one of these Ryzen 7000 ones. So it just needs to be cheaper. That's really is it. But also it gets beat by the 12600K. That's also kind of embarrassing. So that's like a self-owned from Intel for way less. So the 13400F is not the best. The only thing going for it is its price. But even that is not super attractive. So I'll go ahead and put it probably at the bottom of C tier. It's not terrible, but it's not outstanding either. But I wouldn't mind using it in a gaming PC build. Now the 5800X is kind of weird because the 5700X that I just talked about earlier has nearly the same performance of a 5800X, and it does retail for about, I think, $10 less. So the 5800X provides a minimal increase in performance for only about $10 more, so it's not not terrible by means, but the 5700X I think is a better buy. So I will put this in D tier, but it does deserve to be near the top, right there. But now the 7600, we are finally getting into the meat of Ryzen 7000. Now this CPU is in an awkward spot because, like I just said earlier, the Ryzen 5 7500F, very excellent budget gaming CPU. And if you were to put these two CPUs head to head, they would have the exact same performance because the 7500F is nearly the same CPU as the 7600. It just doesn't have any integrated graphics, hence the F. And I like to think those of you who may consider the 7600 over the 7500 would only do that for the included stock cooler, which could be a thing, but I really think you're stretching it with one of those stock coolers, especially with one of these new Ryzen 7000 CPUs, because in gaming, you can get away with it, but for anything that is CPU intensive or CPU heavy for gaming, that little stock cooler might not keep up and you probably will replace it either way with an aftermarket CPU cooler. And if you're gonna get an aftermarket CPU cooler, either way, you might as well spend an extra $8 and get the 7600X, because this will offer more gaming performance. But the 7600 is still not a bad CPU. It's way better than some of the Intel CPUs and AMD CPUs that I just covered, because it is going for a very attractive price of about $190, which I believe puts it in B tier above the 13100. And we might as well knock this out of the way. The 7600X is a better CPU for only $8 more. Let's be real, you're all ready to get an aftermarket CPU cooler if you were to get a 7600 anyway, so why not get the 7600X and get free performance for not that much more. Oh, but the 12500, this one's annoying, man. This one's actually kind of like, even the 13500 is a much better CPU because it comes with more E cores. The 12500 didn't. It stayed at 6 P cores and 6 E cores, I believe. So the same as the 12400. Basically, imagine this CPU right here in A tier, but slightly faster, but you're paying like $90 more. It's not good. Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be another Garbo tier CPU. Avoid it at all costs. Now this one you can't even avoid because it doesn't exist anymore. Do you guys remember the 5600X3D? The only reason why I'm including it in this tier list, even though I said to be eligible for this video, you have to be a purchasable CPU on the market. That is no longer the case for the 5600X3D. It was only available at Micro Center for a limited time, and you can't even find them on eBay anymore. But I have to include it in the ranking either way because I know there's gonna be that one guy who's gonna ask for it, and I'm gonna be like, bruh, 5700X3D. Anyways, this is the cheapest X3D CPU you can buy if you're able to find one. 6 cores, 12 threads. That extra cache you get with those X3D CPUs from AMD are no joke. They definitely do really impact gaming performance in the games that can utilize that extra cache. So it is a valuable CPU. I just don't see how you can get your hands on one. And if you can, it's probably overpriced because it might be a rare CPU, which why would you want to pay that premium for a 6 core, 12 threaded CPU when you can probably get a 5700X 3D for the same price right now on Amazon. So this is probably gonna go at the bottom of D tier. Let me see, what did I put it? It's gonna go above the 5600X because 3D cache is pretty dope. What is not dope though is offering no performance over the CPU that came before you, which is the case for the 14400F. All it offers is just a measly clock increase over the 13400. And if you look at benchmarks between the two, sometimes this is like faster by 1 FPS or like 5 versus the 13400, yet this costs an additional $30. So an extra $30 for at most 5 extra FPS is not worth it. And there's much better gaming CPUs out there for the same price of a 14400. Therefore, I'm gonna put it in E tier above the 4500. Yeah, that sounds about right. Okay, now I think the most well-rounded APU from AMD, the 8600. I do have this one. I like it because it's, I think, hitting the sweet spot. 6 cores, 12 threads, features a much more capable integrated RDNA GPU than the 8500G, yet it costs $100 less than the 8700G we'll cover later in this video. And if you look at benchmarks between the two, this actually is somewhat close. So I think in terms of value and hardware and specifications, it's the best blend of the new APUs from AMD. Still, I wouldn't recommend it if you're gonna build a gaming PC with this and then get a discrete graphics card, because the 7600 or 7600X are gonna be much better choices because they are just straight up faster than this because they feature more cache. But still, I'm gonna put this at the top of the the APU category because I think it's the most well-rounded one. Now the 5700X 3D. I'm really happy that AMD pushed out this to the market because now anyone can get their hands on this. It's available on all retailers and it's the most cost-effective 3D V-cache CPU that I said you can realistically get. Now, why I'm not super crazed about these older X3D CPUs is because if you're gonna build a brand new gaming PC, once you get above $200, you really shouldn't be considering an older AM4 CPU because that's gonna lock you to DDR4 RAM. And all of the new Ryzen 7000 chips I'm gonna cover later in this video, as well as some of the ones I just covered, utilize DDR5 RAM. And at some point, you're gonna wanna stay on that newer RAM because that is just gonna be better for your gaming performance. So although these older X3D 3D CPUs are pretty neat, they aren't the smartest to go with if you're gonna build a new PC around them. They're only worth it if you're gonna be upgrading, say, from an older AM4 CPU to one of these. So that is going to impact its ranking, but I still can't deny that its gaming performance is pretty well. So I'm putting this in, where is it gonna be? Where is it gonna be? Oh, that's right, it's B tier, but at the bottom of B tier. Now the 12700K. This is a very interesting CPU because it is actually really well performing. It's just a real shame that the 7600X and 7600 exist for less. That is the only inconvenience you would have if you were to buy a 12700K right now. But it's still an i7 processor, comes with 8 physical cores and plenty of E cores. So if you did want to throw in a little bit of multitasking and workload applications on top of your gaming, that's where the 12700K might make a little more sense, but you're definitely gonna give up some gaming performance because it is an older CPU versus one of these newer Ryzen 7000 CPUs. But it's still a very excellent CPU, which is why I'm gonna put it at the very top of C tier. Now, the next 3 CPUs we're gonna cover are really awkwardly priced. These are all about $240, and there's only one of them that I really like. But one of these is really funny to talk about. One of them is pretty upsetting. And like I said, the other one I really like. The 14500 is the funny one because for some reason, the 14500 is cheaper than the 13500. Why would a newer CPU that is meant to replace its older counterpart somehow cheaper? I don't know, ask Intel. But its performance is actually not terribly bad because it's about where a 12600KF would be, which is really good. The only issue is that it costs $240 and it is not that fast, say compared to some of the other CPUs we'll soon be covering for only about $20 to $10 more. But it's okay, not great though. So I'm probably gonna put this, it's gotta be below. I mean, $240, that's kind of mediocre for the performance it provides. Now the 13500 is slightly slower, it costs a little bit more, and it doesn't make any more sense to get. So I'm gonna put this in F tier, yeah, above the 8400F. Like, why would you intentionally get a slower CPU for more when the newer, faster one is $5 more, but still both are pretty bad CPUs. What is not bad at all though is the 13600K. This is the other very excellent Intel gaming CPU you're gonna see in this tier list. Like I said, if it's an i5 and a K series CPU, it's gonna be really great. And fortunately, the core improvements from the 13600K over the 12600K are definitely noticeable. And you get that updated architecture with Raptor Lake over Alder Lake, and its price for the KF model is very reasonable. I think it's $323, but the non-KF model is about $350. So not bad by any means. And kind of like the 12600K, the 13600K is one of the only Intel CPUs out there that can match or at times beat AMD when it comes to price to performance. Or like I said, the only inconvenience that the 13600K has to go up against is the fact that the 7600X has been coming down in price. You can get this for below $200. And although in terms of performance, this slightly, barely loses to the 13600K, it is a substantial amount cheaper depending on the model you get. So for that reason, it's gonna rank really well, just not as well as you'd expect. So this is going, oh, I've got this messed up. 7600, that needs to be in A tier. 7600 stays in B tier, and the 13600K goes right below the 12400. My apologies. My ranking was messed up for a little bit because I forgot the S tier bar existed, and I think I did mess up a few rankings, but I think we got that fixed now. Anyways, next up we have the 5800 XT. This one's funny. It's literally a 5800X with a slight increase in boost clock. Yet this one apparently is gonna retail for about like $250, which I think, I don't wanna use the word, that would be very game ending for AMD to do, because for $250, why even get that when the 5900X is probably gonna be faster because it features more L3 cache, and the 7700 also is gonna retail for about a little bit more than that, and that's just a newer CPU. So I don't know why they're bringing back the 5800X like this and the XT and putting a price premium on it. I don't see where AMD is going with this CPU. I know it's not out yet, but I gotta include it nonetheless. For that reason, it's gonna go at the bottom of F tier. I think it's gonna be a stinker, because why bother getting that CPU when it's gonna offer like maybe a 1 FPS boost in performance over the 5800X? Because like I said, the only difference in specs between this and the 5800X is that it's a 0.1 gigahertz boost clock difference, but you're paying like $80 more. Doesn't make any sense. Now the 5900X, although I just rendered the 5800 XT, is gonna get that much credit from me as well, because why would you build a brand new PC around a 5900X? I believe even in terms of gaming performance, both the 5800X and the 5900X are beat by the 5700 X3D, just because the X3D chip comes with that 3D V cache. So again, kind of worthless. If you need a CPU with more than 8 cores, great. But for gaming, it doesn't really help it, although it does feature more L3 cache. So for that reason, I'm gonna put it above the 4100 and the 5800 XT. Would I put it above the 8400F though? I don't think so, because at least the 8400F is cheap. The 5900X for $250 is just too much for an older CPU. Now the 7700 for $250 right now, which is a really good discount, but it's probably gonna go up to like $280 later this month, is also very, very good. I think in a way, it might actually be a better deal than the 7700X, because unlike the relationship between the 7600X and the 7600, where spending that extra $7 does make a difference between the X and the non-X model, there's gonna be almost no difference between the non-X and the X model of the 7700 and 7700X, or at least there's not that much of a difference, but there is a bit more of a noticeable price gap. There is about a $30 gap in price between these two versus say $7 between these two. So the 7700, I'm gonna rank it fairly well. I'm gonna put it above the 7600 here, because right now at its current price of $250, it's a very well-performing CPU, and it is noticeably cheaper than the 7700X while providing still almost as much performance. Oh, but this one, so you take what made the 8400F not great with that reduced L3 cache, and you scale that up to 8 cores and 16 threads, and I think this doesn't change the L3 cache at all, and you get the 8700F, and this retails for $280. Why did AMD release this CPU? It's like, why bother with this when you can get a 7700? It comes with integrated graphics even. Like, why? It's gonna be slower than a lot of the CPUs above it, while costing like almost twice as much. A 12600K or a 7500F for almost half the price is going to demolish this CPU. I gotta put this in Garbo tier. I think above the 12500, yeah. But let's return to some good stuff. Here we have the 7700X. This is also a very fast CPU. At one point, it was AMD's fastest CPU, because it just so happens to be that the 8-core 16 variant of these Ryzen 7000 CPUs just happened to be the most compatible and work the best with the majority of PC games out there, because 8 cores really is the sweet spot for premium PC gaming. But like I said, there is a noticeable increase in price on this versus the 7700, and I don't think it's worth it for that price increase, but it's still a very awesome CPU nonetheless. So here I'm probably gonna put it below the 7600 and the 7700. 14600K, again, providing minimal increases in performance over the 13600K while costing an additional $50. It just doesn't make sense. This one's gotta go probably between the 5500 and the 14100, because it's still a Intel i5 series K series CPU. That's still very good. It's just horrifically overpriced. What is not overpriced right now and is on a really nice discount is the 13700K. I quite like this CPU actually. For $323 for the KF model, and I think not that much more for the regular K model, this is also another Intel CPU that can match or sometimes exceed AMD's price to performance. And it's gotten quite down in price, so I'm gonna have to give it a pretty decent ranking because versus AMD, like the 7700X, not only does it trade blows, but sometimes it wins. But I think given its price, because the 7700X can be found for below $300, but this 13700K can only be found for about $320 right now at the lowest, and at the most, like $340, I'm gonna put it just right next to it. It's still a really awesome CPU. It just doesn't have as much value as the 7700X. And also, there's not that much of an upgrade path beyond the 13700K, because think about it, what can you really upgrade to from this CPU? You know, one of these behemoths that consumes so much power that it hurts to look at. Yeah, so you really are at a dead end if you go with the 13700K, because that is probably the most extreme you want to go with the CPU. So that's why it also ranks below the 7700X. Now the 8700G, which I do have here, does come with a beefier stock cooler, which is pretty cool over the 8600G and 8500G, but that doesn't justify the fact that it is $300, kind of expensive for what it offers. But if you wanted the best APU from AMD, here you go. But I still think the 8600G is a better buy, so I'm gonna put it right below it. Now the 12900KS. This one is interesting, and actually I priced it incorrectly. You can actually get this right now for below $300. And if you look at benchmarks, it's kind of like a 13700K. It just consumes a lot more power, but it's also slightly slower. So it's actually not too bad. This one's not gonna be down here, but it's not gonna be up here by any means, because there are much better CPUs for the price. I think this is going to go smack dab in the middle of E tier, but I think I might put it, yeah, at the top of E tier, if I'm being honest. Like, yeah, the 13700K is a better CPU, but this is like not too far behind. You just have to deal with its outrageous power consumption. Okay, the 5800X3D, and this might be my most controversial ranking out of this entire video. The 5800X3D right now is really overpriced. It's really overpriced. It does not make sense for a first-time PC builder, because why would you spend $330 on the top of the line AM4 CPU and then not have anything to upgrade to beyond it after that? It only makes sense for existing AM4 users, which is the only credit I can really give. But for that reason, it's not going to rank as highly because I am factoring a little bit of longevity into these CPU choices here. And upgrade path as well. And this is the cream of the crop for AM4. You can't get any faster than this. So if you get to this, you're gonna have to replace your motherboard and your RAM and get a whole new CPU if you want to upgrade to anything faster than this. So financially, it doesn't make sense for a first-time PC builder like I just said. But it's still fast. So I'm probably gonna put it at the bottom of C tier. If this were below $300, it'd be probably up here with the 12700K. But at its current price, nah, especially if the 5700X3D can be found for $120 less. Actually, no, I'm gonna be unapologetic. Top of D tier. It's overpriced right now. I'm sorry. What is not overpriced and what is gonna put a smile on my face? I'm not biased, because objectively, the 7800X3D is the #1 fastest gaming CPU on the market, and it is one of the most valuable. This retails for about $350, or at most $380, but even at $380, it is still very much worth it. And remember what I said when I said cores aren't everything for gaming. That certainly applies to the 7800X3D, because the X3D cache layout with this CPU and its 8-core 16-thread layout works the best. This is a faster gaming CPU than the 7900X3D and the 7950X3D. Don't believe me? Look at benchmarks. Legitimately, the cheaper CPU beats the more expensive ones with the same 3D cache technology. It is the best blend of hardware, performance, and value out of this entire tier list video, which is why it is no question that it goes to the very top of S tier. If you can pick up this CPU for a brand new gaming PC, not only are you going to be set for a very long time, but I don't think you'll be swayed at all to upgrade this CPU to any of the new Ryzen 9000 CPUs. I wouldn't be surprised if the 3D cache in this CPU alone carries it and allows it to beat like the new 9700X or even like the 9900X. just because this has a ton of L3 cache to work with and the price is too good. And no, the 14900K is not faster. It is not, especially with the new Intel power limits that are on those high-end i9 CPUs, which is once again so funny because you have this amazing CPU for $350 and then AMD is like, yo, let's put out a 5900 XT, which is a 5950X, but like clocked 0.1 gigahertz slower, and it costs the same. Who's gonna buy that? I find it weird as well that this is a 16-core, 32-thread CPU, yet it's called a 5900 XT, and the 5900X, that's a 12-core, 24-thread CPU. I don't know what's AMD's on with these older CPUs. Somehow they're still selling, they can get away with it. Congrats, but I'm not gonna recommend it. I'm gonna throw this below the 5800 XT. It's gonna cost way too much and offer no performance, especially if, I'm just saying, you can get a 5800X3D or a 5700X3D for less and it'll perform better. And the same applies to the 5950X. This is the same as this CPU, just 0.1 gigahertz faster, and I think costs basically the same. And you really wanna stay away from these older multi-core, 12-core, 16-core CPUs because the performance gains you think you get from having more than 8 cores aren't worth it with these CPUs for gaming. When you can get a newer CPU with less cores, but that faster single-threaded performance thanks to being in a newer architecture. So this is gonna go below the 5900 XT because it's probably gonna cost more and like barely offer any performance increase over this CPU. Now, one thing I do want to correct versus my last CPU tier list video is that the 14700K did actually get a spec increase over the 13700K. The 14700K comes with 4 additional E-cores over the 13700K, and its price is still expensive. It's still not making up for the fact that its architecture more or less is the same as the 13700K, but it does show a bit of a noticeable increase in performance. But for its price, it's gonna get easily dislodged by the 7800X3D, and it's probably gonna get dislodged by one of the new Ryzen 9000 CPUs as well. But this is probably the best 14th gen CPU out of this entire video. Maybe I already said that for the 14100, but I think the 14700 simply takes that because it's the only CPU out of the entire lineup that received a spec increase, and it did actually increase its performance because of that. But it's still not fantastic by any means for a first-time PC builder. Because once you get that CPU, just like the 13700K, what are you gonna upgrade to? You're done. Nada. Zero. It's over. You're gonna have to get a new motherboard, and yeah, it's gonna be ugly. Whereas with AMD, you don't have to do that with AM5. 7900. I am not a fan of these 12-core Ryzen 7000 CPUs, only because the 7800X3D exists. And like I said, more cores don't necessarily equal more gaming performance, although the 7900 does offer more cache over the 7700 and 7700X. But if you look at benchmarks, it still actually loses. So I'm gonna put this in E tier, but definitely above the 12900KS, and the same is gonna apply to the 7900X. I mean, both of these are interchangeable. They're basically the exact same CPU, but I'll give the slight edge to the 7900 for being cheaper and being more efficient. Okay, now we're getting into the last few, but this next one is really interesting because the success of the 7800X3D has been so massive that AMD has brought some really good price cuts to the 7900X3D. It's currently undergoing a price identity because it can't decide if it wants to be like $390 or $330. It's been fluctuating a lot recently. So if you can get this for a really good price, at the end of the day, it's still a 3D V-Cache 7000 series CPU. I get it, it's not the most efficient layout because that X3D cache layout doesn't really work with a 12-core 24-thread CPU like this one. But if you can get it for a really good price, it's definitely worth considering. It'll still be a lot faster than a lot of the CPUs here in the tier list. So I'm gonna put this smack dab in the middle of C tier. If you can get it for a reduced price, excellent. But if you can only find it for about like $390, then it's not even worth considering because the 7800X3D will be a faster CPU for $40 less. 13900KS. This one is unlike the 12900KS, which is below $300. 13900KS is like selling for $450. That's not great. And the performance increase, I mean, it's noticeable, but for $450, no. I'm thinking this guy, it's gonna go somewhere in F tier. I just don't know where. I think I gotta put it probably, yeah, right there, below the 4100, because at least the 4100 is cheap and on a discount. This CPU is not, but it still definitely performs, but it's just horrendously overpriced and you can't upgrade from it. Now the 7950X. This one might get me in trouble, but I'm gonna tell it as it is. Just because you're a 16-core, 32-thread CPU doesn't necessarily make you the best CPU for gaming. If you check out benchmarks between this CPU and even like say the 7700X or the 7800X 3D with half the cores and half the threads, it gets beat a lot of the time. And that's just because 16-core, 32-thread CPUs aren't the most efficient layout for gaming. And this is quite costly because, well, because it is, but more importantly, the 7950X 3D can be had for only a few dollars more. And with that 3D V-cache, this does kind of justify the existence of being a really high core count, high thread CPU. So the 7950X does not get that great of a rating from me, but I will put it above the 12900KS. It's gonna be here in E tier. And now the 7950X 3D. This justifies the price point because it does feature 3D V-cache, although it's not the most efficient core and thread layout for utilizing that, but I've already said that a billion times, but it's still blazingly fast and probably the second fastest CPU out of this entire video, or actually it might be tied with the 14900KS actually. But because it's not, you know, the most efficient core layout and it is quite costly, I will have to put it probably here at B tier, but that's still a really good ranking. But like I said, the 7800X 3D is a faster CPU. So there you have it. In addition to, oh my goodness, we're finally here. Oh, I'm letting you guys know I own 2 of these and I'm letting you know it's bad for gaming. But why do I use an i9 14900K? Because Intel QuickSync is actually goated for video editing. It would not be possible to make these videos you see here without Intel QuickSync, because I shoot with H.265. It's a compressed video format, and I can import that directly to DaVinci Resolve and scrub through it with a live timeline with ease. That's why I use Intel. And I'm an enthusiast too, so I can deal with the insane power draw of these CPUs and just undervolt them a ton. But have you kind of heard like how many justifications I need to make to, you know, justify that I own these CPUs and I personally use them? They're kind of absurd. If AMD could get down and dirty with their integrated graphics and make them better for video editors, I would switch to them in a heartbeat. But for that reason, I have to stick with Intel. But if you aren't that kind of person and you are actually considering getting these for gaming, they're way too hot, man. They are way too hot. You gotta undervolt them to a very severe degree, which is what I got running right now. So it's gonna go to the very top of Garbo tier. Yes, the CPU I use every day is Garbo tier. That's how you know I'm not biased. And once again, I want to give another thank you to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Anyways, that is the entire tier list for the best CPUs you can buy right now in 2024. Ooh, it's been a long video. I hope my video editor has fun editing this. You're welcome. But for you guys who have been watching up to this point, thank you so much. If you've enjoyed this tier list video, do give it a like. Likes do help. And if you enjoy these kinds of videos, I do plan to make more tier list videos, so you might want to subscribe. So with all of that said, thank you so much for watching. And this is the Scattervolt channel, signing out.